In this video, we will show you how to replace your fuel pump sending unit assembly. Let's get started. Okay friends, let's get started on our fuel pump. To do that, we're gonna make our way underneath the passenger side of the hood. All the way along the back, you're gonna find a square plastic cover. Along each side, you'll find a little tab you can grab onto and gently lift it up and away. Now, when you have the cover off of there, you want to look at the bottom. That's going to be the area with the legend. The fuse that we will be looking for is a 15 amp fuel pump fuse. You can see it right here. You'll notice in line, it has three 15 amp fuses next to each other and then a 10 amp. So when we go into the box, we'll be looking for those three 15 amps next to each other and the 10, and we'll remove the last 15 amp. 1, 2, 3, and then a 10. So let's remove that last 15. Once you have it out of there, give it a quick inspection. Now we're going to set that aside. We're going to try starting up the vehicle. What you're going to notice is it either does not start, or it starts and then it dies right out. Either way, it's a good sign. All right, so now that we tried cranking it and it either didn't start or it did start and then died out, go ahead and put that fuse back in and cover it with the plastic cover. Continue on from the fuse panel to the negative battery terminal. We'll use a 10mm wrench to loosen this nut just enough that we can take the cable off of the battery itself and set it aside so it's making no contact. Let's move along to our left rear wheel. To remove this, you're going to want to make sure that you safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle. After that, remove all 6 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have the wheel out of the way, we're going to continue by removing this plastic panel. To remove this, you're going to find that you have 2 Phillips head screws holding it in place and 1 push clip. The push clip would be located in this area. Our truck's pretty rotted and it's missing. One of the mounting screws will be located underneath the fender. Use our Phillips head to remove that. Then we'll make our way up into this area and remove this one as well. Once that's out of there, we're going to continue on by grabbing onto this and give it a little wiggle. You'll find that it's trapped in this area up here and down along this area. Once you get it broken free, you should be able to shift it, maneuver it, and pull it right out. There we are. Now that we have the plastic panel out of the way, we can continue on to removing this smaller line. To remove this, you're going to find 2 square tabs. There's one under here and one directly opposite from it. To easily squeeze these, I'll use some pliers, squeeze on each of those at the same time, and then release the line from the fuel filler neck. We'll just give that a quick inspection and set it aside. Now we can move to our fuel filler hose. To remove this, we're going to use a 10mm on the clamp. We'll loosen it up, move it out of the way, and then pull the hose off of the filler neck. Commonly, to remove a hose, you'll have to use a hose pick like this. Carefully get in between the hose and the filler neck to break it free. Once it's broken free, continue on by grabbing that hose and carefully pulling it off of the filler neck. The next thing you want to do is take a rag and put it inside the filler hose. Now let's move up to the evap canister. On the evap canister, you're going to find that you have a line that reaches over to it and it has a white connector. We have to disconnect this white connector from the evap canister. To do that, it's going to be easiest using 2 picks. We're going to come in between this area, right along the side. Once you get 1 pick into one side of it, you're going to continue on, do the exact same thing on the opposite side. What I want to do is get behind the little ears, and I'll show you them in 1 second. Get in between those, gently separate it a little bit. And now I'm going to use a pry bar and carefully get into this area and gently pry it off, being extremely careful not to damage the connector or the evap canister, keeping in mind that they are only plastic. There we are. Now that I have this side past the locks, I can remove my pick. Work out the other side real quick. It can be a little bit difficult to get it to slide off. There is a gasket in there that likes to get stuck on the plastic. You just want to get in between the ear and the evap canister and gently pry it apart. Then you can slide this off. Now let's take that line and push it up and over this other rubber hose. There we are. Now let's take our rubber filler hose and slide it on the inboard side of the frame. Now let's have a look at the top of the fuel tank. What we're looking for is an electrical connector located in this area right here. To easily remove this, I'll just use some long nose pliers. Grab onto the locking tab located along the top there. I'll give it a little squeeze and gently pull the wiring harness away from the fuel pump assembly. Once you have the wiring off of there, just give it a quick inspection. If you see any corrosion, that's something that you would need to deal with. We'll set that aside. Now that we have the electrical connector off of there, we're going to move along to the fuel line. For the fuel line, there's going to be 2 locking tabs, one on either side, one on the rear and one on the front. To break these free, you can use that pick, get right up against the locking ear, and then press it in. Once you have it pressed in, carefully try pulling on that fuel line a little bit. I'll do the same to the other side. Once both of them are broken free, we should be able to remove this. Keep in mind, there could still potentially be fuel in this area. There we are. The next thing that we would want to do would be to get ready to remove our protective shield underneath the fuel tank. To get this down, you're going to find that you have 4 mounting bolts holding it up. There's one right up in this front corner next to the drive shaft. On our application, that bolt head is rotted and a socket won't take it off. So with that said, I have to remove the drive shaft before I continue removing the shield. You may or may not have to remove the drive shaft in your particular application. Now, if you were to be removing the drive shaft for this application, you want to keep in mind, you have to have the entire rear differential raised up off of the ground. You also want to make sure that you chock both sides of your front wheels so you don't have to worry about the vehicle shifting on you. After that, we're going to move along to removing all of our 17mm bolt and nuts from this area. Inspect your hardware as you remove it, set it aside. Keep in mind, as you remove the last one, there isn't anything holding this from falling down. Don't get hurt by being under it as you remove this. Once you have all the bolts out of there, we'll carefully pry the drive shaft away from the yoke and bring it down. Now I'm going to hold on to the drive shaft and I'm going to carefully slide it out of the transfer case. Set this aside. The next thing we want to do is apply some support underneath our shield. With that out of the way, I have clear access to this mounting bolt. Now let's move to the rearward 12mm headed bolt. Now we can move over to the other side of the shield. We're going to be looking for 2 more 12mm headed bolts. Let's move ahead to our forward bolt. Now we can carefully lower the shield out of the way. Now let's put the support underneath the fuel tank. Once that's being held safely in place, we'll continue on to removing our straps. You'll notice on each strap you have one 17mm headed bolt that holds it to the frame. Go ahead and remove that bolt and then pull the strap down and out of the way. Now let's do the same to the front bolt. Now we can grab each of the straps and we'll gently flex it out of the way. Now with both of the straps out of there, we can start lowering our fuel tank down. Have a look at the shape of the fuel tank itself. You'll notice it's much larger towards the rear. That's important to note if you still have a lot of fuel in your tank. Mine's under a quarter tank, so I'm pretty sure it's pretty light. But if yours is full, you're going to have a lot of weight on the rear. Now as we bring this down, you just want to be very careful for your fuel filler hose on the other side. Now that we have the tank down on the ground, the next thing that we want to do is clean off the entire top area, especially inside underneath this cover. You're going to notice that generally it has a lot of dirt and debris in this area. You want to make sure nothing falls down into the fuel tank while we continue. Now with that said, you still have an open port on the side where that fuel line was. So with that said, you just want to make sure you cover that with something. I have a plastic cover, I'll slide it right over the end. Now let's use some compressed air and gently blow air in the area. Now with the top of the fuel tank cleaned off as well as possible, we're going to continue by removing this shield. To remove the shield, you'll find that you have 3 10mm headed nuts holding it in place. Looking at ours, they're completely rotted. Go ahead and remove yours, and then remove the shield. Now in our case, as you can tell, the top nuts here are rotted. So what I'm going to do is very carefully use a brass punch and a rubber mallet. I'm going to try to tap this counterclockwise and try to remove the entire thing from the fuel tank. And then once I've done that, I can continue by trying to remove the top cover. There we are. Now that I have this separated, I'm going to continue on with a couple of picks. What we want to pay attention to is down inside this area. On this line, you're going to have 2 clips that come through from either side and they hold on to the top of the fuel pump. We need to release those. So all I'll do is carefully get in here, stick it in between the fuel pump and the line, and gently pry that ear apart. Do the same on the other side, and then slide the line off of the fuel pump assembly. Obviously, this step would be a lot easier for you if you had this cover off. Now we can remove this ring. We'll give it a quick inspection. Make sure it doesn't look like it's rotted or damaged in any way. It needs to be strong because this is what holds the fuel pump assembly down into the fuel tank. Go ahead and lift up on that fuel pump assembly and lift it up and out of the fuel tank. Keep in mind, it could still have fuel inside of the fuel pump assembly. Don't get it on your skin. Just try to dump that right back into the fuel tank. There it is, friends. Now on the fuel pump assembly, what you're going to want to do is remove this locking clip. Once you have it off of there, we're going to make sure that we put it into the existing fuel line in the vehicle. We'll get in between this area, there's a little tab, and you should be able to lift it up a little bit. Once you have one side lifted up, do the exact same thing to the other, and then remove it from the area. We'll give that a quick inspection. Over at the fuel tank, we're going to continue on by removing the gasket. And then you need to make sure you clean the entire area where your gasket is going to go. Let's get our fuel pump gasket installed onto the tank. Slide it right into position. It should sit inside this ring. Now it's time to install our fuel pump assembly. Have a look at the top. You want to make sure that you have the wiring harness facing towards the rear of the fuel tank. Let's take this and slide it into position, being careful for our level sensor. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is carefully press this down onto the gasket. Once you have it down there, you're going to continue on to the ring. Typically, you're not going to have this top cover on here. We do because our mounting nuts were rotted. Let's put this into position, being careful not to break the fuel pump assembly. Now what you want to pay attention to is the ears that come up from the fuel tank itself, and make sure they fit into the larger grooves on the locking ring. It should go all the way around. Assuming that looks good, go ahead and turn this clockwise to lock it in. We'll use a hammer and a brass punch to drive it in. Pay attention to those locking ears. You want to make sure that they're slid all the way around into the locked position on all of the locking ears. Now we can put on our evap line. We're going to slide it right onto the fuel pump assembly here. Latch it in. Give it a tug to make sure it's secure. It should move around a little bit, but it should not slide off. After that, go ahead and line it up with its corresponding groove and lock it into position. Now we can start putting the fuel tank back up in the vehicle. You want to pay attention to the filler hose. We'll hold it in this position and slide it up and over the frame once we get to that point. Now as we bring this up, we want to make sure that you have it lined up with its mounting point up here. You can see where the strap needs to come up and then connect in where the hole is. We'll put this in position and get the bolt in. Now that we have this one started in, we'll pause and continue on to the forward strap. Now that they're both started, snug them up. Remove your support. Now let's start putting our shield up. For us, we had a couple broken bolts. So in place, I welded in some studs before I put the fuel tank up. For you, you just want to line up the mounting holes and then put in all of your mounting bolts. Now that that one's started, I'll start this one in as well, and then make my way to the outer mounting hardware. Now that we have the shield up there, let's continue on putting in the drive shaft, assuming you had removed it. Get this lined up. Once you have your mounting bolt holes lined up, go ahead and start in each of those mounting bolts. Start on the nuts, snug them up, and then torque them to 61 foot-pounds. Once you have all your hardware started, snug it up. Let's take that locking clip that goes inside the fuel line and get ready to install it. Looking at the fuel line itself, you can see where there's two notches for the clip to latch into. We'll press it in there. Once we have it in, put it onto the fuel pump assembly. That looks good. Slide it in, listen for a click. Once you get a click, go ahead and give it a tug. Make sure it's secure. It's okay if it moves around a little bit, but you definitely do not want it to slide off. Once you have that on there, continue on to the wiring harness. We'll take that, slide it into position, once again listening for a click, and then give it a tug. Let's get this reconnected. Press it in, listen for a click, give it a tug. Let's get this line secured. Press it right on there, give it a nice tug to make sure it's secure. Now we can reconnect our filler tube. We'll put the clamp on there first, slide it up as far as we can, slide the hose on there as far as we can as well. Once you have it up there, go ahead and tighten that clamp. Make sure it's nice and tight. Let's get our plastic protective shield reinstalled. We're going to start paying attention down to the bottom here. You want to make sure that this area slides over the rod, and also this slides behind the fender. Once you have that slid into place, we'll line up both of our mounting holes. Start in your mounting screws and snug them up. The next thing we'll do is reinstall our wheel. Once you get it up there, start on all of your lug nuts, bottom them out. We'll get the wheel safely back on the ground and then torque each of them to 98 foot-pounds. With the wheels safely on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Now let's make our way back onto the hood. It's time to reconnect the negative battery terminal. Before you do, you want to inspect the post on the top of the battery and the wire that connects to it. Make sure you don't see any corrosion on there. If you do, go ahead and clean it off. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to reapplying this to the battery. All right, so now that we have the battery connected, let's hop inside the passenger compartment. We're going to attempt to start this. You might happen to notice it takes a couple extra cranks before it turns over. Now, once you let it run for a few seconds, turn it off and make your way underneath this area once again. What we're looking for is to make sure we do not have a fuel leak. It's super important to make sure you don't have any fuel making its way down. If you do, more than likely the fuel line leading to the top of that fuel pump isn't connected properly. This looks fine. After that, go ahead and take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.